How does this sound? That is better. All right. Tell me if I'm too loud, because I get really excited and then I get loud. Mike knows that too. Mike is my husband. Hi, wave, Mike. Yes. So.
She's Mrs. Dr. Metlay. I'm Dr. Mr. Dr. Metlay. Her stuff that she talks about is way cooler.
I disagree. He's the one who's actually published a book. I haven't yet. So there's that. Anyway, what's really wonderful is I've got so many good friends from places I didn't expect to see tonight, and I'm just so happy to see all of you. So what we're going to do tonight is you will suffer through my talk, and then we're going to go check out the other telescopes. We're going to turn on the star wall. We're going to do all sorts of fun stuff when it gets dark. But right now, it's still bright and exciting.
It's near the summer solstice.
That's right, which gets me to our next slide, which is solstice was yesterday.
What?
Yeah, I know. Which means yesterday was the official first day of summer. And do you know what that means? Can somebody tell me? Zach.
Today is the second longest day and the second shortest night.
That is correct. So for those of you who couldn't hear Zach, yesterday was the longest day of the year and the shortest night, and tonight is just a little bit shorter, but it's still a really long day, and this is why I'm going to talk a lot until it gets dark. But, what's really interesting is a lot of people think the direct rays from the sun always hit the equator. Do you see the pink line that says equator? But it turns out that on the summer solstice, it's hitting this different line. Can anybody under age 30 tell me the name of this different line that the direct rays? Daniel.
All right, so for when it's like a summer, for the Earth, it has its tilt, and after when it reaches midnight, on the first day of summer, the tilt changes to like that, and both North and South America both equally get sun.
That is true for the equinox, except the planet does not change its tilt. We're always on Earth, tilted 23.4-ish degrees from straight up and down. But otherwise, you were absolutely right. And so what that means is on the first day of summer, 23.4 degrees north of the equator is the Tropic of Cancer. And that's where the direct rays of the sun are. So starting today, we're going to see the direct rays of the sun get closer and closer and closer to the equator until the fall equinox. That's when the direct rays of the sun are at the equator, at the equinox. Then we're going to go 23.4 degrees south to the Tropic of Capricorn, right through South America. That's right. And then we're going to go back up to the direct rays of the sun hitting the equator again. And it just keeps bouncing like that as we go from season to season. And that's what the seasons are. It has nothing to do with how close we are to the sun and everything to do with this tilt and where the direct rays of the sun are hitting Earth. Any questions or comments? Yeah?
But then the skirt of the galaxy and the sun never moves.
Oh, absolutely. Everything moves. But that was a great question. Does everything move?
Relative to the sun, but the sun is moving.
Well, yes, but we're moving with it. So we keep our relative tilt and our relative positions. Yeah, no, that was a great question. Is that Harriet who just walked in? Hello, Harriet. Zach.
Well, if the sun gets really hot, how does it have fiery if it doesn't have any oxygen nearby?
That is a good question. Zach asked, how can the sun and other stars stay on fire if they're not using up oxygen? And the answer is they're using other stuff. And we will talk about that probably after my talk. What's your question?
Are any planets tilted?
That is a really good question. Are any other planets tilted? What do you guys think? Yes, all of them. All of them are tilted to some extent. Some of them are not tilted very much. Some of them are tilted a lot. Like Uranus is tilted all the way over, so it's lying on its back. So yeah, the planet, every planet tilts. Okay, last question for right now. Yeah, the sun is always hot, but only some of the sunshine warms us up. So again, it depends where you are and when you are. Yes?
Where's the moon?
So we're going to talk a lot about the moon tonight, and if you don't mind, I'm going to hold that until a little bit later. Thank you. All right, so let's just very quickly discuss what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about missions to the moon that are not from NASA. But I do promise we will get to NASA again later tonight. We will focus primarily on the past 2 years, 2023 and 2024. We're going to talk about our local connection in Westminster. It is actually very exciting. And we'll talk about the Artemis Accords that brings NASA back into the picture. But before we do that, let's rethink who gets to go into space. Now, this is a picture from 60 years ago of Ed Dwight. Has anybody heard that name, Ed Dwight? Yeah, he's been in the news. Okay, so let's talk about why. It turns out back in 1961, that was a long time ago. That's even before my husband Mike was born. He's old. Probably the greatest journalist, in my view, of the 20th century, Edward R. Murrow, wrote a letter to the administrator of NASA, James Webb. Have you guys heard the name James Webb? He's got a telescope named after him.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, there is the Webb telescope.
Exactly right. Well, this is that James Webb. But James Webb wasn't the most enlightened guy at all. There are certain kinds of people he didn't like, meaning anyone who was not a straight white man. So he did not let Ed Dwight fly in space. But you know what? Blue Origin did. Ed Dwight last month went into space at age 90. Now, some of you know that William Shatner went into space with Blue Origin a few years ago, and he was 90 at the time. William Shatner is almost 93 now, but Ed Dwight is further along being 90. So Ed is now the oldest human to have ever gone into space. But let's not forget Wally Funk, who was the oldest woman to fly in space. This was also a few years ago. She was also turned down by James Webb. So age is no longer a barrier. National origin, ethnic affiliation. You don't have to be a straight white man from the US military to fly in space. Now anybody can fly in space because we have private companies that will help you do it. Plus we have more enlightened views on the whole subject. So the good news is that there have been lots of people who've tried to get to the moon, and we're going to continue getting to the moon. Look how crowded this picture is. And also look at the years. So has anybody heard of the space race? Okay, so here are all the Soviet, now they're called Russian, missions that actually made it to the moon intact. I'm not talking about the ones that crashed. I'm talking the ones that got there and did their jobs. These were little robots. Here are the American little robots in the light blue, and the American astronauts, the only humans to have ever walked on the surface of the moon, the only people to have ever actually left Earth and gone to another place where they could walk around. I'm not talking the International Space Station. I'm talking going to the moon and walking around. Notice this keeps alternating. 1, 2, 3, 4. You see how it goes back and forth? It really was a race. But the last time humans walked on the moon was 1972. Some of your grandparents are from 1972. Or a little further back like me. But the next mission to make it to the moon was 2013. These are the Chinese. in yellow here. And then we have the Indian mission in green and Japan in purple. And notice 2024, what year are we in right now? Hey, so we're still adding to this map. Now there have been lots of missions to go to the moon in between where they would orbit, but I'm talking landing. So actually, these are all landings. The ones in the dark blue are the people. Okay, but yes. That is a good question. Where is Apollo 17? You know what? I didn't put the graphic together, so I apologize. Thank you, Mark, for pointing that out. It was December 72. It was Harrison Schmitt and who was the other astronaut? Yeah, Gene Cernan. Okay, we're going to do Levi and then Zach. What's your question, Levi? Okay, and Zach?
Well, I noticed that the one from Japan, it was June 19.
January 19. Yeah, so January was 6 months ago. It's now June. We're good. Okay. All right, so I've had several people ask me, why is it so hard to get to the moon? We did it 50 years ago. Well, yeah, we did in a pretty communist way. I mean, think about it. It was completely government controlled. It was all military people. And at the time, the Vietnam War was going on. So if a military person died, it was just like, shrug. I mean, it wasn't for the family, but it was for the government. I mean, they were already losing lots of people in other places, so losing astronauts. And in fact, did we lose any Apollo astronauts? The ones who didn't make it off the ground? 1967, Apollo 1. 3 astronauts died. Did it stop the program? No. So it was a very different era, and things were done differently. And it really wasn't something that we could sustain. When the Vietnam War ended in 1975, government priorities changed, budgets changed, and that was the end of the Apollo program. And we really could not get back into space for decades after that. Do you remember the space shuttle program and all the troubles they had in the 80s and 90s whenever there was an explosion? So that's another talk. But the point is, now we have private companies, which is great because that offers innovation, but they have other things to think about. They've got to make sure their clients are happy. There's profit to be made for shareholders. Safety is a consideration, not only for the astronauts, but for the people who put stuff together. And supply chains issues during COVID, all the rest of that, there are things to think about. There are lots of people outside the US, either governments or private companies or both, who are putting things together. But you know what? They're all kind of reinventing the wheel. Some of them are skinny wheels, like you might have on your bicycle. Some of them are fat wheels, like you might have on your bicycle. But if you're reinventing a wheel or trying to come up with a brand new kind of wheel, it can be difficult. So there's a lot of new stuff, some with new companies, some with old companies. This is a picture of the Starliner from Boeing, which partnered with NASA, and it's docked to the International Space Station right now, as we speak. There are several astronauts on the International Space Station from a few different countries, and then 2 astronauts came on the Starliner, except they can't go home yet because they discovered some helium leaks and some other technical issues. So they're doing their system checks, and the return to Earth keeps getting delayed. Getting to space is hard. It was hard in the 60s. It's hard now. Question?
Do they have a plan for patching those leaks?
They're making it up as they go along right now, yes. So yes, there will be a plan. It is in process. Zach?
Well, and also another delay is like finding the right spot to land. So
Oh no, they know where to land. It's okay. The issue is can they get back to Earth safely? It's coming through the atmosphere. That's the hard part. Okay, so let's turn our attention to 2 years ago. Actually, excuse me, a year and a half ago. South Korea, who knew South Korea had a spacecraft going to the moon? Did you know? Did it make the news? It did not. All of these countries are doing all this interesting stuff. So, Joe, can you play that first video? Let's see if we could see some of the pictures from this South Korean orbiter of the surface. And if you can make it full screen. Thank you.
South Korea's unmanned lunar orbiter, the Danuri, sends back photographs of the moon's far side, featuring vivid images of craters. It's the first time that the nation has taken photos of that side of the moon. Chong has more. South Korea's first unmanned lunar orbiter, the Danuri, has sent photos of the moon's far side. The high-definition images were taken during its current mission and were released on Wednesday by the Ministry of Science and ICT and the Korea Aerospace Research Institute. Danuri, which is rotating around the moon 100 kilometers above the surface, took pictures of the Tsiolkovsky crater, a large crater on the back of the moon, on March 22nd. Pictures of the Valley Schrödinger and Szilard M craters were also taken on March 24th. They are the first photos of the moon's far side that South Korea has taken. The lunar orbiter also sent back separate photos of the Beacon crater, taken with its wide-angle polarimetric camera, or POLCAM for short. This device is designed to study the moon's surface composition and its volcanic deposits by measuring the degree of polarization. The Science Ministry said the magnetic field meter and gamma-ray spectrometer on Danuri are also obtaining observation data. Danuri entered the lunar orbit on December 27th last year after 145 days of traveling from Earth and started its operation on February 4th, about a month after test runs. The lunar orbiter is assigned to measure the terrain, magnetic strips, gamma rays, and other traits of the lunar surface using 6 onboard instruments until the end of this year.
It was still COVID. They're wearing masks.
Identify potential landing sites for future lunar missions. The Science Ministry said the public can check Danuri's real-time location, along with its photos and collected data by visiting the orbiter's official website. 정은주, 아리랑이.
Okay, Joe, if you could close that. Thank you very much. So, South Korea just got its first pictures of the dark side of the moon, which gets to a question that somebody had earlier. Does the moon orbit Earth? Do we get to see all of the moon? When we're on Earth, we only see one side of the moon because the moon spins, it turns around itself in the same amount of time it takes for the moon to go once around Earth. That's called a 1-to-1 spin-orbit ratio. So some people say that's tidally locked. And what that means is we only get to see the side of the moon facing us. We never get to see the other side of the moon. Well, does anybody know when humans ever saw the far side of the moon for the very first time? What year? What year do you think? Not you, Zach. Anybody else? What year? I'll pick on you later. Someone said 67. Daniel? It's not 69.
Is it eyes on personally, or is it images up?
Humans have never been to the far side of the moon. Only robots and orbiters have. Right. So when did the very first picture of the far side of the moon from a spacecraft come to Earth?
Last year.
Not last year.
2000?
Okay. It was 1959. 1959. That's right. That was Luna 1. It was on the slide I showed earlier. Which means Luna 3. Thank you. This is why I keep him. He is my fact checker and sanity checker. Levi.
How many days does it take for them
To go once around? It takes, that's a good question. How many days are in a month? Are we looking at the days from our point of view or the days it takes for the moon to actually go around Earth? Those are two different numbers. So we're going to average it at about 28, but in reality, it's, well, I'm going to let you answer that.
So between If you are looking at the phase of the moon from full moon to the next full moon, it's closer to 27 days. But if you look for the time it takes the moon to go around the Earth, and remember the Earth is also orbiting the sun, so for the moon to make a full circle around and realign with the constellations, that's a little over 29 days.
Thank you very much, Andrea. You see, you need different WGU faculty members to explain stuff to you. Okay, the key thing is that there are some people in this room who are older. You've been born before 1959. So all of this has happened in your lifetime. I mean, it's really an amazing change, an amazing time in human history. Well, since that South Korea mission, which by the way is still active, it was supposed to end at the end of 2023, it's still going. Japan had a private company that had a private mission, not related to JAXA, which is the Japanese version of NASA. Sadly, that crashed. Russia, oh my gosh, Russia, which used to be the great Soviet Union. Russia was saying, we're still here, and they crashed. But India made it. India, which we really didn't expect. India, by the way, now has an astronaut corps, and they're getting ready to have astronauts go to the moon. So India made the very first successful soft landing in the South Pole region. Now, their lander and their rover didn't do so well, but they got some data for almost 2 weeks, so that's something. Now we're moving into 2024. Now we're in January, and we had this Japanese mission. Now, the fascinating thing about this Japanese mission, oh, thank you very much, Ted, is it landed on its nose. I'm still here, it says. And so, believe it or not, it has every month woken up during daytime on the moon. Daytime on the moon lasts 2 weeks. It's very hot and very sunny on the moon, but then you get nighttime, and it's very dark and very cold. So if you have a little spacecraft powered by a solar panel, it goes to sleep for 2 weeks. So for 2 weeks, in January, the Smart Lander for Investigating Moon, that is its real name. I'm not being offensive, that's the real name. It sent out pictures and data in January, February, March, April, but it did not wake up in May. They are gonna try again in like 2 days to see if it will wake up again. So let's think good thoughts for SLIM. Now, before it landed on its face, it popped out 2 little rovers. And when I say little, I mean little. So Joe, can you play the next video, please? Yeah, let's make it full screen. This is so cute. Notice its little tail to stabilize it.
我々が持っているおもちゃの技術というところが宇宙の探査に活かせるんじゃないかといったところから始めました。今この探査物理ロボットが宇宙のことで遠い宇宙のことをより皆さん身近に感じてもらって宇宙に興味関心を持っている子どもたちにもらいたいなと思います。
So for those of you who can't read or speak Japanese, he was basically saying, we want this to be a cute toy for kids so they'll get interested in science and space. And I want one, don't you?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That is so adorable. And the engineering on that is just perfection. Mike.
And in case folks didn't catch it, they've worked. They're on the moon right now. That's how they know the spacecraft landed on its nose.
Who took that picture?
Because that picture was taken by one of those little rolling rovers.
So it works, and Tomy, the toy maker, I mean, you can go to a store and buy a toy from Tomy. You can go online and buy one. I mean, it's so cool. Okay. Okay, so the United States said, wait. We can't let everybody have all the fun. A private company called Intuitive Machines, now this took years to develop, sent up their own mission called Odysseus, and they were going to land on the moon, and they did. They landed perfectly. But then one of the legs on the lander broke, and it tipped over, and it's sitting on its fuel tank. So it's still there. It is the first U.S. lander on the moon since 1972, robot or human. And it is a fully private mission. NASA had nothing to do with it other than give its blessing. So it did send out some data, but it really wasn't safe to do anymore. And obviously it also sent out a little camera. It kind of took a selfie, which is why we have the image on the bottom. But yeah, so not doing so great. Yes?
I have a weird contract question. So can anybody send something up to the moon?
Yes, but as long as you have your paperwork in. And the paperwork does not go to NASA. The paperwork goes to the Federal Aviation Authority. So the FAA, just like an airplane, because you have to fly through the air before you can get into space. So what you're really doing is asking for permission to go through US airspace. And if they say yes, then you can launch. Does that help?
Does the rest of the world have to go to the FAA?
They have to go through their own version of the FAA, yes.
And do they coordinate?
Occasionally they coordinate. Yes.
What if you were to find an island that is not a country or anything?
Yeah, this is the point. Private companies now can do this as long as the paperwork's in order and they're telling each other so that there hopefully won't be any collisions in space. One of the interesting things that is a real issue, what Andrea left out of my bio is for a few years, I was the operations director at Secure World Foundation, which is now in Broomfield. And what Secure World Foundation, and they're still around, they still do really interesting stuff. One of the things that Secure World Foundation would talk about is space sustainability and environmental issues. And one of them is making sure there aren't collisions and there isn't space junk. I mean, there is space junk, but we try to minimize that and see if we can bring that down a little bit. So it turns out, I learned this when I was with Secure World Foundation, the private companies around the world that do space flight talk to each other because there is no governmental organization. I mean, sure, there's the United Nations, but really, there's nobody in charge. So they talk to each other to make sure that they are coordinating with each other. So if you get a satellite that misbehaves, and honest to gosh, these are called zombie satellites. If you've lost control of your satellite, it's a zombie. You have to notify everybody else. Hey, this is coming. It might come toward you. Please move your spacecraft out of the way. The International Space Station has had to move out of the way of zombie satellites a few times over the past few years. Did anybody watch the TV show Lost a few years ago? Remember Lost? The finale of Lost was almost not shown because there was a zombie satellite that was going to hit the comm satellite that was broadcasting Lost to everybody. Anyway, the private companies worked it out. Everybody got to watch their TV show. They saw the finale, liked it or hated it, whatever. But yes, so the private companies do this on their own because nobody is telling them what to do. And satellites and other things in space cost a lot. And nobody wants to fill out the paperwork for insurance. Yes?
Has there ever been known an individual or organization that launched something that did not communicate it and found out about it later?
So this very good question is, has anyone launched anything without notifying other people? And the answer is, well, the North Koreans try, but there are a whole bunch of people like these good folk at LTO who are amateur astronomers, and you cannot get anything past them. No, I am serious. There's an entire network of amateur astronomers who look for these dark or black ops, these launches that are not reported to anyone. So no government or private company can get away with it without some amateur astronomer posting it online. Mike?
I should point out that that's the case nowadays, with citizen astronomy being such an important part of the world of science today. People like LTO, people who love astronomy, who have big telescopes in their backyards. A lot of speculation has gone on about what happened in the 1960s.
Okay, but that's...
That was then. So you'll see YouTube videos popping up once in a while about secret Soviet space missions and cosmonauts that vanished. And there's not a lot of strong evidence that any of that happened, but back to the 60s, you can't prove it didn't. So that gives YouTube a lot to talk about.
Yeah, but for the past 25 years, like LTO is 25 years old, you can't get away with anything. Zach, and then I'll move on.
What about the mission to Pluto?
Oh, the New Horizons mission to Pluto, that got total approval from everybody. And some of you from WGU know, in my office, in the background, thanks to Mike, I have a big paper cutout of Dr. Brian May of Queen. He's now he's the lead guitarist for the rock group Queen. He went back to get his PhD when he was age 60. And now he works with NASA on the New Horizons mission, which is looking at small bodies past Pluto. Yay, Dr. Brian May, my hero. Okay, so China has been busy. China sent up some communications relay satellites. These are going to be important later on when we talk about the next spacecraft, which is the Chang'e 6 lander. Now, this was interesting because China didn't tell everybody what they were doing. What they did was not only did they have a lander on the moon on the far side of the moon, only China has landed on the far side of the moon so far, by the way. But it had an ascender, and I'll show you a picture in the next slide, so put a pin in that. It also had a surprise little rover, and it just landed on June 1st. What day is today? June 21st. This is 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, China did this. And in addition to its surprises, it deployed a little satellite, which is now in lunar orbit, from Pakistan. Did you know Pakistan had a space program? Okay, so here's the Chang'e. And what was so interesting, it also popped out a little camera so we could take a selfie. This part on top pops off. So what they did was they scooped up some soil and some rocks, and they put it in the part that pops off, and that's now headed back to Earth. It should arrive next week.
Next week?
Next week.
In 7 days. 7 days until it's back.
That we hope, if everything goes well. Yeah, I want to see that. My specialty, my PhD is in geology and planetary science. Oh my gosh, I want to look at those rocks. And the dust, I'm good with dust too. Oh, wait, I wanted to come back. So there's been a lot of interest here in the South Pole. So instead of looking, at the normal side of the moon that we can see, pretend we take the globe of the moon and we've tilted it so we're looking at the South Pole directly. It's like looking at Antarctica directly. And just like Antarctica is covered in ice, we really think that the South Pole of the moon has a whole lot of ice, especially in very deep craters that are in shadow. So it stays cold, it stays dark. Not necessarily all the time, but often. Yes, go ahead.
So I've heard that there's a special energy source on the moon called He3.
Well, helium-3, it's not an energy source yet. If humans can mine it and turn it into a fuel, then but we're decades away from that.
Dr. Metlay is a nuclear physicist. So if anybody wants to talk about helium-3 reactors after the talk is over, come find me. I'll talk to you about the technology. Now is not the time.
All right, so why do we care about water? Because A, we can drink it and wash things in it, but also we can crack it apart into hydrogen and oxygen and make fuel out of that much more easily than helium-3. But you asked a very good question. So here's what we now think is really happening. The old view was that water was trapped inside the rocks in the little, nooks and crannies. But we think, sure, there's water there, but there's also water right on top. And when it gets warm, when it gets all bright and sunny, just like water on Earth will evaporate. That means go from liquid or even solid. Here in Colorado, we have sublimation. When it snows, the next day it's bright and sunny and you don't get melt puddles, just the snow goes away. It converted from solid ice to water vapor. When you evaporate, you emit vapor. You go from liquid to gas. When you sublimate, you go from solid to gas. We have sublimation happening here, and that means the moon gets a little tiny atmosphere, and we call that thin, wispy, watery, oxygen-rich atmosphere an exosphere. Every planet, every moon has an exosphere that we've looked at. I'm sure there are some exceptions, but we keep finding exospheres now that we know to look for them. Zach?
Doesn't that mean that there is a spot in space? Like, there are spots in space where you can breathe?
There's not enough. You need enough oxygen to breathe comfortably, and there's not quite enough. But if humans can capture it and condense it and then put it in our spacesuits, then we could breathe it. So yeah, that's why the space corporations around the world, as well as governments, are really interested in finding these ice patches on the south pole of the moon. Well, what's really neat is the water turns into water vapor, and then at night it turns into frost again, and it goes back to the ground. It just covers the ground of that part of the moon in ice, like the ice on your driveway in the winter. Yeah?
Is it true that if you were in space without a spacesuit, you would die from several other factors long before you ran out of oxygen?
Pretty much, yeah. You don't want to have an open cut if you're in space. But it's not like in the movies. There are ways you could survive for a couple of minutes. You just have to. It's like deep sea diving. Being underwater can kill you all sorts of ways. But if you're an experienced deep sea diver, you can live a little longer. So, but yeah, you don't want to be in space without a spacesuit. That is bad. Ginny?
What about the North Pole?
The North Pole of the moon?
Yeah.
That is a good question. We believe that there is this same sort of ice process happening in the North Pole of the moon as well, but there's more ice on the South Pole. Just like on planet Earth, there's more ice on the South Pole than there is at the North Pole. And that's a whole nother discussion. Yeah, what's your question?
So there's water evaporating, and you said that it creates sort of a small atmosphere. Eventually, during the daytime on the moon, could you hear like a little bit of sound that you created or something?
That is a good question. And the question is, are there enough molecules so that you can hear sound? And theoretically, the answer is yes. Remember, you need atmosphere. You need molecules to squish together and stretch apart for a sound wave to travel through it. So if you have enough molecules, then yes, sound will travel through. And in that case, they can hear you scream in space. Okay. So, but no, and by the way, even Galileo saw this. He would make notes about these weird glowy lights on the moon. Later on, in the mid-1960s and 70s, they were called lunar transient phenomena. I didn't know what it was. People from Earth have always been looking at these weird glowy lights on the moon. If you have a telescope, you can, it's like, what is that? And now we know it's the H2O molecules moving around and reflecting light. So yeah, it's really neat. All right, so I love looking at the moon. Remember earlier I said there's the side of the moon facing us. We call that the near side. Well, now there's a lot of investigation on the far side. Chang'e 5 of Japan, no, excuse me, of China, Chang'e 5 of China, just a little while ago, like a few weeks ago, sent some lunar samples back to Earth. And here's an article. This image came from an article published in May 2024, so that's last month, talking about how, my gosh, we're getting all sorts of new, interesting information about the volcanoes. All this dark material is volcanic in origin. And so the Chinese are sampling different places than the Americans and the Russians did. And so they're getting different information. So we are still doing an awful lot of science on the moon. We're still learning about the rocks and the minerals and the materials like H2O. And what's really exciting is now we're going to get our very, very first sample return from the far side of the moon. And that's what's so exciting. It's going to be next week. And then in a few months, the first papers will be released and we'll be able to look at the pictures ourselves, which is awesome. Scientists always get the good stuff first, and that has to go through public relations, and then it gets to us.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the sort of the chain by which information is made public, or at least to the international scientific community.
Right. Well, obviously, it's like when you go to the doctor and you get an X-ray or an MRI, the doctor gets to see it first, and then they have to process and analyze the images, and then they talk to you because doctor, patient, it's just the two of you who are going to know the results, and then you can start spreading the news to your family if the news is good or not good, right? And it's the same thing in the scientific community. The scientists get to see it first, but then they have to process it and make the pictures pretty, and then they need the permission. If it's a private company, then you've got to go through intellectual property, rights. And if it's the government, then the government has to sign off on it. Not just the US government. You can imagine the bureaucracy in China to get a picture released. So it can take a few months before something gets published for the rest of us, unless they really want to brag. If they really, really want to brag, then it's going to be a live stream transmission and it's going to go out to everybody, or it's going to be processed super fast, so you get it the next day. Remember back in the old days when we had newspapers, we had to wait a whole 24 hours to find out the news and see a picture? It's like that for space imagery, because the raw stuff can be hard to see and understand. Sometimes you need the colors tweaked so things pop out. And you also need time for the scientists to turn the science into English that we can explain to everybody. But anyway, cool. It is so exciting. So there are more missions coming in the next few months. There's NASA's Lunar Trailblazer and NASA's Viper rover. There's this Artemis program that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And if Israel can get itself together, then the Bereshit 2 mission is going to go. Bereshit 1 crashed on the surface of the moon in 2019, and they were going to try again, and then the United States said, come be part of the Artemis program. And they were like, okay. And then they were like, but we still want to send our own. So they've been doing private funding, and it's all private, and we'll see if they launch next year. I don't know. So this Artemis program, Levi.
Why were there those little dots on that side?
Oh, the pictures of the moon with the dots? Oh, just because I put the dots there. I'm sorry, Levi was asking, why are there black dots? And it's like, because I put black dots there to make it more interesting to look at. Okay, so the Artemis program, Artemis in Greek mythology was the twin sister of Apollo. I didn't even know Apollo had a sister, but apparently yes. So the Artemis program is how the United States and partner countries are going to go to the moon starting next year, maybe? Question mark. So Artemis 1 already launched. It was a flight test There were no people on board, but they did send the Orion spacecraft around the moon. And, well, it wasn't empty. It had no people, but it had toys and other things there. Artemis 2 is going to have these people. Or at least 2 of these 4 astronauts will go to the moon. And they're just going to fly around the moon. That will be Artemis 2. Artemis 3, the first humans, one of these 4 or others, will actually walk on the moon. So that'd be cool. And then Artemis 4, there's going to be a lot of private sector activity around. So let's do this last video, I think, and talk about advanced space and the Lunar Gateway mission. So if you can't read, this is moving very fast. Just look at the pictures. But Advanced Space is based in Westminster, Colorado. And they used a private company called Rocket Lab from New Zealand to launch in June 2022. So that was 2 years ago. And it took a while to get where it needed to go. It's not just a direct flight. And so there's Earth spinning. And basically, they're using the sun's gravity to, for free, get an energy boost so they can put it into the correct orbit. And so it took them, instead of 3 days, 3 months. Near rectilinear halo orbit is a brand new part of space where they want to put the Lunar Gateway, which is going to be the International Space Station kind of thing, around the moon. It will always be able to look at Earth, and it will always have a good view of the south pole of the moon. So that's why they're picking this weird location. So basically, using this little device the size of a microwave oven, they're testing to see if this is a safe space, a safe place to put that International Space Station kind of thing. Okay, you can stop it here. Thank you very much, Joe. So basically, the mission is technically over, but the device is still in this orbit. And what's interesting about this orbit is normally, when we think about an orbit, we think of here's the moon, and we think of something going around the moon, like this, right? Kind of in a horizontal plane. Well, instead, it's going around the moon like this. So instead of our usual way of thinking about things, you got to go the other direction. And no one's ever done that before. So Capstone is testing to make sure that it's safe and it's okay. Ginny, do you have a question?
What was that little tiny moon-like thing orbiting the moon?
It was this little Capstone microwave size. Oh, there are lots of ways to orbit the moon. Let's go to this next slide. So here's that near rectilinear halo orbit. They need a better name. That's not a good name. But here are the other ways to orbit the moon. So here's what we normally do. Most of our spacecraft, like that little Pakistan CubeSat, goes once around the moon every 2 hours, and here's that horizontal kind of frame of reference. But there are other kind of orbits, and this sort of going around my elbow orbit is the one that they're looking for. And again, nobody's ever done it, so they're testing it. And what's great is this is all private. Private companies, it has NASA's blessing, they're technically partnered with NASA, but actually all the private companies are taking the risk and doing all the work and doing all the innovation. Do you have a question, sweetie? Okay, what is it?
Why is a red moon in a
Why is it a big O? Because that's a good shape for going around other things. That was a good question. Okay, so I used to joke like 30 years ago, defense contractors always make sure they have congressional support because they have subcontractors in every congressional district in the US. NASA was listening to me? No, it wasn't. But basically they did the same thing. They're now partnering with all these different companies in 49 out of the 50 states. I don't know which state doesn't have a contractor or subcontractor. Some of you have heard me talk about Colorado Space Program before. 15% of our economy is aerospace. A whole lot of these subcontractors, these little tiny innovative companies, are right here, including here in Berthoud. There are all sorts of really talented, incredible people working on this stuff, and you don't even know it. You're going to the same grocery store and buying the same watermelons, and yeah, this is what they do for their day job. Okay, but they're not the only ones. So countries like the United Arab Emirates have been saying, we will build an airlock, which is a really expensive doorway. I don't know if you can feel the wind coming in. There's air coming in through the door. Well, sometimes you want to stop that air, or you want to hold that air because you're going to go into space where there isn't much, or there isn't any air. So an airlock is like a doorway where you can hold in the air so you can breathe and be safe and get your spacesuit on. And then you can go out where there's no air. And they were like, well, we'll build it. Can we have an astronaut in your moon program? And the United States said yes. And Japan, I love it. Who drives a Toyota? Well, Toyota's about to make a lunar rover. And when they get the lunar rover working, then they get astronauts too. Japan already has astronauts, but President Biden just, let's see, this is from April. So President Biden said, one of the Japanese astronauts will be the first non-American ever to land on the moon. So this is how other countries are partnering with the United States to get where they want to go. And private companies are doing it on their own or with NASA. And these countries have signed something called the Artemis Accords. And starting in 2020, when we got the first signatures, there are more and more every year, they agreed on 10 principles. And this is I'm getting to the end of my talk here. I'm not going to go through every one in detail, but peace, transparency, interoperability, meaning things will work with each other. Did anybody see the movie Gravity with Sandra Bullock? Yeah. Okay, it was a great movie. It was terrible science. I mean, they did talk about the Kessler syndrome correctly. The first 5 minutes of the movie were great, then not so much. One of the things that they got totally wrong was the interoperability, because first off, the Chinese space station, which is doing fine, Tiangong, doing fine, they're not even in the same orbit as the International Space Station. There's no way she could have gotten from the ISS to Mir or some other decommissioned space station that doesn't even exist anymore, to the Chinese space station where she ended up on that movie. Physically, there's no way to get there. They're not interoperable. They were deliberately designed to not work with each other. Levi.
Do they only do the moon?
My talk is only about the moon. There's all sorts of other good stuff about other places that we will not talk about tonight. Zach, and then I'm going to move on.
I think that with all the zombie rovers on the moon, I think sometimes might crash.
They might crash, but we don't have zombie rovers. Well, we do have some zombie rovers on the moon. Good point. But no, they're not crashing into each other right now. But the whole point, remember I said the private companies are making sure their regular satellites that work well don't bump into each other? This is to make sure all the stuff we're going to do near the moon or on the moon don't crash into each other either. We're going to make sure they play nicely with each other. So that's important. Okay, emergency assistance. You do want other people to help rescue you, and you want to promise to rescue them if they get into trouble. You'd think there'd be nice people to help you out, but not always. Registration of space objects. We have to keep track of what's where and who has it. So we're back to paperwork and insurance claims. You gotta have your, the deed to your car to prove it's your car if it's in a car accident and you want to get an insurance claim on it. So same thing for stuff in space. Release of scientific data. I know this seems obvious, but sometimes you gotta write it down. Protecting heritage. There was a comedy TV show a couple of years ago called Space Force with Steve Carell. Did anybody watch that? So one of the jokes was that the various people on the moon would, take each other's flags and mess around with each other's rovers. Okay, that would be criminal. Don't do that. And so part of the Artemis Accords is saying, we promise not to touch your stuff because we recognize how valuable history is. And then space resources, because gosh, a lot of these private companies are in it for the money. What can they get? Like helium-3 that's worth mining. So you gotta promise that you're gonna be, we know there are intellectual property rights involved, but you're still gonna let other people know that these resources are around. Deconfliction. Oh my gosh, just because there's a war on Earth doesn't mean there should be a war in space. This is a real issue because when Russia invaded Ukraine 2 years ago, there were Russian and Ukrainian and European and American astronauts all on the space station. And they were like, are we still friends? And the answer is yes. They decided that in space they would all work well together regardless what was happening on Earth. And that's called deconfliction. You want to play nicely with others, even if other people are not behaving so well. And then orbital debris and spacecraft disposal. In other words, clean up after yourselves. Don't make a mess and leave it for somebody else to clean up or crash into. So here's my last slide. Can anybody tell me, if you can read these country names, can you name one of the countries that's in Africa that's on the screen? Daniel.
Nigeria.
Yes, Nigeria. Very good. That's one of the 3 African countries: Nigeria, Rwanda, and Angola. What about countries from South America? You.
Brazil.
Absolutely right. Very good. So Brazil is in South America, also Colombia, Argentina. Where's Pablo? Uruguay. Thank you. Down here, Uruguay. Okay, we have talked a lot about Japan, and we've talked about South Korea. North Korea is not on here, but South Korea is. Levi?
Is your talk almost done?
Yes, this was my last slide. Levi was asking, is my talk almost done? The answer is yes. And Singapore is from Southeast Asia, New Zealand and Australia. Of course, Australia is its own continent. So basically, if you think about where humans live, we're going to leave out Antarctica. Humans live in Antarctica, but that's a whole nother story. Every single continent where humans live is represented here. There are 46 countries. Last week, a statesman from China kind of sneered at this and said, oh, it's NATO for space. And I'm like, yeah.
NATO?
NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This is a good thing. It says down here, United for Peaceful Exploration of Deep Space. Now we're starting at the moon. Yes?
So what is the time frame approximately for these Artemis missions?
For the Artemis missions? Well, a lot of private companies and governments from all over the world are busy making their stuff right now. But technically Artemis 1 already occurred last year. So we are, in the next year, going to go to Artemis 2. So probably 5 to 10 years is the time frame. Okay, in the back, and then I'll get to you.
So, are the U.S. Space Station
Yes to both questions. The first question is there going to be a space station or colony on the moon? First, we're going to do the lunar gateway in that near rectilinear halo orbit, meaning yes, around the moon. There's going to be an international space station. Here are the countries involved, 46 countries. And once they get that working, then they will each send people to the moon and make a moon base kind of thing. That is the goal. Will it be more efficient so the rest of us can go too? That is the hope. Space tourism was a whole nother talk. But yeah, space tourism is a thing. That's why Blue Origin at the beginning is sending up 90-year-olds to prove that anybody can go into space. And hopefully, eventually, some of the people in this room can go to the moon. That would be really cool. Zach.
Oh yeah, my question was that are we eventually gonna have people living on the moon?
Yes, the whole idea is that eventually we will have people living on the moon, maybe one of you guys. So there are so many more missions to the moon and other places around our solar system and beyond our solar system, and I forgot you and I apologize.
It's sort of a quick one. What's the latest on they're trying to decide on a time zone?
Oh yeah, so there actually is a committee meeting right now to try to figure out what will lunar time be. The moon needs a time zone. And they're figuring it out right now. So in process. When I come back next year, I'll hopefully have a better answer for you. Time zones and the way people talk about time is important. Mark.
I want to rewind back to the beginning. The solstice.
Sure.
Yesterday, I believe, was the earliest in 220-something years.
And they're going to keep getting earlier for a little while. It's part of a much larger cycle of
Oh no, I'll let Mike answer this one. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to
Mike, Andrea, do you want to take that one?
Actually, we do have a special announcement that Jay needs to make.
Let's do that. My talk is done. Thank you so much. I will.